The manors, castles, and stately homes I visit across Britain are brimming with magnificent history and inspiration. But the gardens and landscapes which surround these beautiful buildings have their own rich heritage and stories to tell.
This bit of the garden actually was designed like this by the Victorians.
Okay.
The 6th Duchess, when she was a widow, and her companion, who was a cousin, they were very influential in this.
Right.
And they moved that north wall back about 3 metres, creating this flat terrace
I
like this,
I
you
see, okay.
And creating the herbaceous borders, which I think were a much more Victorian and then Edwardian tradition.
This is one of my favourite areas of the garden. We call it the sundial garden, one of the only areas of what we would call formal planting that we have in the garden. And this is the original template of the garden. Essentially, you would have looked out from in this sort of this bay window.
Right.
And so you would look down over this garden where, you know, you'd see the children play.
When I married into the British aristocracy, it was the start of a wonderfully exciting journey. But it was also a little daunting. I became a Viscountess, and for an American girl from a small town outside Chicago, that was quite a shock.
I live with my husband Luke, heir to the Earl of Sandwich, and our family at Mapperton House in Dorset.
Living in a place like this is a joy, but also a challenge. And every day we're aware that we're preserving a very special part of Britain's heritage. Mapperton has opened up an extraordinary new world for me, and I can't wait to share it with you all.
So if you love castles and manors and stately homes as much as I do, please join this American Viscountess as I journey into the British countryside in search of some of Britain's finest historic houses.
Here at Mapperton, the Italianate gardens are absolutely at the heart of this place. They're both formal and wild. The beauty and power of nature is literally all around. The gardens took on their current life in the 1920s when the owner of Mapperton at the time, Mrs. Ethel Labouchere, designed a sunken Italianate garden in the natural valley here. The gates to the gardens were open to the public in the 1930s, with thousands of visitors enjoying their peace, beauty, and tranquility ever since. For nearly 70 years since the Montagu family moved here in the 1950s, these gardens have been treasured and lovingly cared for and developed, most recently by my mother-in-law, the 11th Countess of Sandwich, who has devoted hours to preserving and nurturing these historic, award-winning, Grade 2 listed gardens.
Well, what's good about the orangery is it's got some rather wonderful plants in it.
And it smells amazing in here.
Yes, it does smell. And then these are lovely too,
These are beautiful.
But what is really good is this rose up here. Do you see it with the lovely white flowers? I put that in. Curiously enough, it's an old Victorian tea rose called Niphetos. And it doesn't really live outside. It's an indoor conservatory rose. And funnily enough, when my parents went to live in Sussex, in the conservatory there was Niphetos. It's the sort of rose that people had in their conservatories.
So when you arrived here at Mapperton, this had been built by Hinch.
Yeah. Nobody think that this is an old conservatory. It was built in 1968. It was opened in 1968, and it leaked from the day it was opened, and it still is.
Right.
Even though it's been re-roofed and heaven knows what. My father-in-law, who was used to a larger garden, even than this, well, this garden is only 15 acres, which in the great scheme of things is not that much, but they are 15 acres of garden, as opposed to rolling acres of parkland. But he was used to a bigger garden, and he always had very grand ideas, my father-in-law, Hinch. So he built an orangery. It's one of the few orangeries built in the 1960s. And it gave him a lot of joy. A lot of joy. It's given all of us a lot of joy. We've sort of changed the plant.
Yeah, did you then
change it?
Change it?
Yeah.
I
mean, the thing we didn't change is the vine over there, which you can't really see, which is that Italian vine, the strawberry grape, Uva fragola. It's so high that what I try to do is create a false ceiling across. Do you see there? Because that proportion is so much better than this higher one.
Yes, no, I do see
So I've been trying to do that, and it's done there with the vine and the rose.
Fantasy, myths, ancient beginnings. Elevate your historical exploration to unparalleled heights with a History Hits subscription. Don't miss out on our latest releases, where classicist Natalie Haynes travels to Corfu to unravel the story of the Gorgon Medusa, one of the most iconic yet misconstrued figures of Greek mythology. Join Jasmine Elmer as she dives into something that people have been obsessed with throughout history: dragons. Where did they come from? What exactly is a dragon? Finally, Dan Snow explores the ancient history of the Isles of Scilly and discovers burial grounds built thousands of years ago. Discover hundreds of hours of award-winning documentaries and ad-free podcasts with History Hit. Sign up for a special offer via the link in the description.
So, coming out here, I remember one of the things that you've always told me is that a manor house having this size of garden and these formal gardens isn't common.
No. I mean, what has happened to Mapperton is that it was a sort of reason. I mean, it's a very beautiful manor house, an astonishingly beautiful manor house, but it would never have had the aristocratic furniture that's in it, which my father-in-law brought from Hinchingbrooke, nor would it ever have had a garden this big. And in fact, my father-in-law doubled the size of the garden. But in fact, what happened to this garden, or rather, if I start from where the garden starts that we can see here.
Yes.
It was put in by Mrs. Labouchere, who owned the house from 1919 to 1954 or 5, when my father-in-law bought it.
Right.
And she put in the topiary garden, which we'll see in a minute or two down there. And it was an Italianate garden, totally symmetrical, right? And the pergola, which we'll see down there, half of it was up here.
Oh my goodness.
So that it was symmetrical. My father-in-law, having put in the orangery, realised he needed a sweep of steps and put in also a sundial where he could address the nation. And it all changed. So it was no longer symmetrical. And the orangery was completely detached from the topiary garden. So I put in this row of crab apples to try to weld the orangery to the topiary garden.
Okay, yes.
And these big flower
at them,
beds.
They're beautiful.
Yeah, they're stunning at the moment.
What's special about the gardens at Mapperton is that they even look glorious on a rainy and wet spring day.
So you've been looking after really these gardens that are award-winning, Italianate gardens. They've won lots of awards. They've been in lots of lovely books, lots of articles.
They're even an absolutely brilliant garden in the winter because they've got so much form, design to them.
But this is an enormous task. And what have you...
But it's never been my primary task.
No, I know that.
I mean, I'm afraid it really hasn't. We have improved them enormously. When I say that, I mean both the gardening staff and me. I mean, when we first came here, they were still sort of quite correctly Hinch's gardens and had absolutely hideous bedding out plants like asters and pelargoniums and sweet williams and things in awful little beds all over the place.
Okay, so you had to do quite a bit.
Oh, a huge amount. And we created that whole run and those beds. we doubled the size, not these beds are the same size, but they were full of just boring white roses or something. I think you ought just to know, actually, Julie, just as we walk past that, that's where the deer have eaten every single leaf.
Oh my goodness, I can see. Yeah, of course I can see.
And so, yes, of course, what John and I have done is we've enriched the planting, hugely enriched it, doubled the number of species, if not tripled, and given it a sort of warmth and excitement that it didn't have. So yes, a huge amount of planting, huge amount of selection of species. I made some hideous mistakes, obviously.
No, I'm sure you did it.
Of course I did, yeah, I have to.
But so what is your...
I can't do anything, Julie, at this moment.
No, I know.
Got to get through, and oops.
Yeah, whoa.
You see, for instance, that my father-in-law put in, he was rather good on clematis.
Okay.
He was good on shrubs. He put in this thing, Carocia. I mean, the arboretum, which he created, has got excellent trees in it. I've actually added some more interesting trees, which one of these days, let's go around and I'll show them
definitely,
sometime.
definitely. Can you tell me just a little bit, though, about the grottos?
Yes, I can tell you a little bit about this. I think the most important thing about this is it is a very, very handsome, very, very elegant topiary garden.
And you created that?
No, this is all Mrs. Labouchere.
Oh, this is all Mrs. Labouchere?
All Mrs.
Okay,
Labouchere. Everything here is Mrs. Labouchere. Now, these little grottos, there are two grottos there.
Yes.
There's the croquet pavilion up there. There's a little summer house there. She had flowers in all of them, Mrs. Labouchere, because she liked to do watercolours.
Yes.
And so she sat in them with a fire, and there's no doubt somebody bringing logs had to.
I know, it's amazing that they...
just had
Have
them.
you ever lit one of the fires in there?
Yes, we did, and it smoked appallingly.
Oh, right.
We lit the one
Okay.
up down there.
Right. If I were to ask you what's your favorite...
I know, people ask me that, and I
All
haven't
the
the
time.
faintest idea.
But,
I don't...
Right.
You know,
There's-
I'm not, I have to say that I'm not one of those great gardeners who really, you know, is obsessed either by gardens or by plants. I'm very interested in plants. And I'm
Right.
very interested in seeing that we have good plants and also that we have contrasts of green and flowers and leaf forms. So that we have contrasts of colour and form.
Yep.
And these are not bad. The holes at the moment are where we plant things which, had this year been a little less unpleasant than it has been, they would already be planted. Can't do it.
But everything's just a bit delayed.
Yes.
Everything, including the wisteria.
These things like these tree peonies, I put in all these because I like the shape of the leaves.
Yes. And when does the Japanese wisteria over there?
Oh, is that the Japanese one? Well, there are two
think
white
so.
ones here. One is chinensis and the other is froribunda, which is Japanese. And well, they should be coming out quite soon. They're always a tiny bit later than the ones in the front courtyard, but they should be coming out. But not in this one. No sensible plant is going to come out in this weather.
No, they're all waiting for the sun, like we are. So tell me just a little bit about the pools, because they're quite a feature.
Yeah. Oh, they are.
Here.
They're wonderful. Well, this first run of yew bushes was here when my father-in-law arrived.
Okay.
He put in the second lot.
Ah, so there was only one.
Yep.
Okay.
And Mrs. Labouchere put in that semicircular garden there.
Okay.
Okay.
Yes.
And I don't know who put in the Irish yews.
Yes.
And this would have been a carp pond for people to eat the fish in the
Yes.
winter.
Yes.
The second one, I have once seen a map where it didn't exist.
Okay.
But that was about 30 years ago, and I've never found the map again, which is really
okay.
boring.
Okay. Do you think Mrs. Labouchere possibly put
Yes,
that in?
quite
right.
likely.
Okay.
Quite likely.
Okay. They are beautiful. Of course, we like to swim in there as well.
But I like to wave at the frogs as I go by. Hi.
Yeah, it's just it's brilliant.
Lovely.
It is lovely.
The best time to swim is 6 o'clock in the evening when the sun's out and you get these wonderful shadows of the yews falling onto the pool.
If we ever do see the sun again.
I can't see myself ever swimming in there again. I will if it's really warm, but
I think you will.
Not in this weather.
It's not in this weather. Anyway, Caroline, thank you. This
Not
was
at all.
a real treat. Every time I come to the gardens with you, I learn something new.
When I visited the glorious Georgian masterpiece, Constable Burton Hall in North Yorkshire, home to the Wyvill family, it was so lovely to take a walk with Imogen in the beautiful formal and woodland gardens.
So this is a really beautiful time of year in the gardens. Everything suddenly just exploded in colour. And actually this is one of my favourite areas of the garden. We call it the sundial garden, one of the only areas of what we would call formal planting that we have in the garden. And this is the original template of the garden. Essentially, you would have looked out from in this sort of this bay window.
Right.
And so you would look down over this garden where, you know, you'd see the children playing or whatever. And then this garden extends out into a sort of tiered terraced garden, which would have been more formal at the outset, but over time has become sort of slightly more of a woodland terracing.
Yes.
The most wonderful thing, which you'll see, is that these trees, you know, really envelop the house. You've got these beautiful cedar trees here, and the house is really nestled in amongst this area. You know, we dip down to the lakes behind the house here, but you feel kind of nestled and cozy in this sort of in this spot.
And those are the lakes that, again, I saw when I entered into the outer hall from that picture there.
Exactly, and I think, you know, we don't have so many maps or drawings that have kind of made the test of time, but it alludes, the few that we do have allude to there being pleasure walks in that area.
Yes.
So we think that we found some sort of big you know, stone areas essentially where we think there might have been, you know, little villas or follies. You know, none of it's there today, but there's a beautiful Palladian bridge down by that lake, which wouldn't have been there had it just been, you know, rural.
Right, exactly.
So, you know, that's a project for, you know, years to come. But we would love to sort of reinstate that route through those gardens as well. But at the moment, you know, this is our sort of circuit as such.
It's so beautiful. You know, there's always projects going on at these houses.
Absolutely.
It's very different in one sense to how they had been lived in the past, because we as custodians, homeowners, we're doing much of the work ourselves.
Totally. You know, we have to do, you know, whatever is actually within our realm of, you know, capacity.
Exactly.
And, you know, there were obviously, you know, hundreds of staff and gardeners and you know, people tending. You know, now we're a very boutique team. So, you know, we do.
I love that term. I'm going to steal that from you. A boutique team.
A little boutique team.
That is brilliant.
So, you know, and actually, this is what brings us pleasure. And you know, you get beautiful vistas through the garden, so you can get a little glimpse of the lakes as you walk through. You can see the river running through. It's actually called the Dean. It's like a jungle out there at the moment.
It is, but it's lovely. I mean, listen, it's all about rewilding the world.
Exactly.
So you are right.
We were trailblazers.
Exactly.
We were the trailblazers.
It's so true.
And you know, it's not something that I know. You know, the garden is coming to me over the course of time. I think you get your head around the house.
Yes.
And then you start sort of, you know, broaden out. And it's wonderful, you know, it's a beautiful, beautiful garden. But, you know, there are little corners, you know, each year we take a little chunk, and I think, you know, then I know, you know, what's going on in that little corner of the garden. And, you know, step by step, you know, you create your journey with the garden. Same with the house. There was a little area just beneath the dining room window there, which, you know, I'd sort of looked at it. We had the formal planting here, and I thought, you know what, that's something we could make more of that. So actually we dug out 2 new beds there, which a great friend of mine designed for my 40th birthday. And we've planted that up now, which is so beautiful, because now I feel, you know, a sense of my own story in the garden, which is so lovely. And now I know, you know, if I pull a weed out of there, I know it's a weed rather than something I shouldn't be touching.
Exactly. You have these extraordinary gardens. We've just sort of wandered and meandered through them with, of course, the backdrop of the house, and then looking down here onto the lovely water. But visitors, can they they can come here?
Yeah, so essentially the gardens used to be open to the public all the way through from March to September. But when we moved in, we've got young children, and we thought that we would shift into something that was a little bit more manageable for us.
Right.
Because the kids need to have a sense of freedom and to be able to ride their bikes and
of course.
But at the same time we wanted to be able to share the gardens. So essentially now we just run more events.
Yes.
And we kickstart those events in the spring season with our Tulip Festival, which is really the sort of the grand opening of Constable Burton Gardens for the season. And that is a long-standing relationship with a nursery called Bloms Bulbs.
Okay.
Who just won their 70th gold at Chelsea.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, so they are really exceptional, and I think the relationship started over 25 years ago. So we're their Northern Show Garden. We're incredibly fortunate to have this amazing relationship with them.
Yes.
And we plant 7,000 of their tulips around the gardens.
Fantastic.
And it's absolutely gorgeous. I mean, I love tulips anyway, so to have these beautiful displays throughout the garden is really amazing.
Amazing. So the Tulip Festival happens when?
So it's the first May bank holiday weekend. So it's sort of 1st of May or thereabouts.
Right.
And then really throughout the entire month of May, the tulips are in the gardens, and it looks absolutely amazing. So you often get the blossom coming at the same time, and the magnolias, and everything is just full of life. And the winters are long and cold. And so for me, that's my it's such an exciting time of year.
Spring is here.
It's here. New life is everywhere.
Right.
Here you get another glimpse of the river running through.
It's fantastic.
Which is so lovely. So this is
beautiful.
Aces grow particularly well here. So the aces draw your eye over across the gardens. It's
and
beautiful.
Also just the light coming in right now
is lovely.
Is really, really lovely.
Yeah. So it's pretty. Pretty gorgeous.
It is really gorgeous. So really, the peak though is of course the Tulip Festival.
I think that really.
How many in total? Do you know how many?
Well, we have. I think we have over 7,000 and about 100 different varieties. So we plant them in a sort of specimen fashion, and each year, we remove them and replant.
You do?
Yeah.
7,000.
It's a real labour of love, and we also. Because you can imagine the deer and this thing is absolutely wonderful. So you go to painstaking lengths with covering them with cages until it's sort of showtime, and then all the cages come off. But it is amazing. It's really an amazing sight.
Yeah.
And actually, then we get left with this. We have obviously take them out, and then we have these huge beds that we, have empty. So we've now removed the tulips, and we replace those beds with dahlias, with a view to having a sort of late summer show for dahlias. What's amazing is when if you go up the parkland and you approach Constable Burton as you would have done, in the original house, you would have snaked through the parkland, and then suddenly, happened upon Constable Burton. You get little sort of, little glimpses of it, and then suddenly it's presented to you. But what you do see is, the foresight that they had to plant this incredible landscape around the house to frame it. It's just genius.
The thought that went into it in sort of designing this space, and again back then it was this community of people that lived either around the house or of course on the estate, and this is how I think historic houses in particular have evolved. That whereas before it was sort of like, okay, everybody just sort of stays within the community, now we as homeowners, we're opening it up so that people can come and stay and enjoy the history of your house, and they can walk through the gardens, and so it's opening it up to a wider community.
Absolutely.
But look at this view.
I know, there it is.
It's so
It's gorgeous at this time of day because the stone really starts to have that golden glow reflecting the sun off it. It changes dramatically in the sunlight.
From North Yorkshire, we head to the Highlands of Scotland, where the drama of the landscape cascades down to the mature gardens which envelop Blair Castle itself. I met up with Sarah Troughton, half-sister of the 10th Duke of Atholl, to explore the historic walled garden.
this is stunning, this sort of visual right here with the castle behind. But now,
Yes.
where are we entering into?
Well, we're entering up Hercules Walk, walking towards the statue of Hercules. And this was all designed and created by the second Duke and his head gardener, John Wilson.
Okay. And what time? Give me a time frame there.
It was 1740
Okay.
onwards. He died in 1764, so
Okay.
it was over that sort of 30-year span. And he, from the front door of the castle, he devised various vistas. One was up to Hercules, slightly overgrown now. One was down the front drive,
Okay.
another was up towards the statue of Diana in Diana's Grove, which is where we have these fantastic big high conifer trees.
Right.
But the one to Hercules was the main one. And he first of all levelled out this path, because I think it was quite like that.
Okay.
Just with manpower, there was no machines
Oh
in
my
those
goodness.
days.
Of course not.
And he planted it up with some nice trees, shrubberies. But a lot of what we're seeing now was planted in about 1900,
Okay.
because there was a terrible storm at the end of the 19th century.
Okay.
And a lot was blown down. And then when he got to Hercules, he thought the view wasn't quite nice enough to the left. It was a bit boggy and didn't look too hot. So he decided to dig a lake the whole length,
Right.
which he called the canal pond, and then a square pond at the far end. So it all drained into that.
Oh my goodness.
And then he thought he'd like to plant some things, but there were too many animals around, so he built a wall all around it. And so it is now. It's nearly 10 acres.
Oh, wow.
Walled
Yeah.
garden.
Fantastic.
And it was developed by the second Duke as what in those days was known as a ferme ornée, an ornamental productive garden.
Okay.
So there were roses and a lot of scent. From the archives I picked this up, but also lots of fruit, lots of vegetables, herbs. So
Right.
it served as both somewhere where you'd take a very pleasant walk,
Right.
but also very productive for
Yes.
everybody. I mean, the amount of produce must have covered most of the estate, I
Yeah,
think. Not just
absolutely.
the castle. The sad thing about this garden was after the Second World War, it was in very poor condition. Somebody tried to run it as a market garden, but it just didn't work. And so in the early 60s, it was planted with Christmas trees from one end
Right.
to the other. So
Right.
all my childhood memory really
No.
is of it full of Christmas trees.
So what happened to the Christmas trees then?
Well, they were cut down when the decision was taken to try and restore the garden.
Ah,
Not
okay.
totally to its former glory, but with all the paths and some of the beds in position.
Okay.
Taking inspiration from the archives, Sarah has revived the historic gardens at Blair.
Well,
Yes,
we had a whole
you-
project. Somebody did a plan. We had a historian who came and researched all the archives and drew up the plan of how the garden would have been. And most of it we could see, the pond was still intact.
Right. Okay.
We had to build up the sides and we had to build up the retaining wall
Yes.
and all that. But the paths weren't here, but it was easy to work out where they'd been, and we
Okay.
re-established them.
Look at the, oh my goodness.
And all these fruit trees are planted. They're not the same species,
Okay.
but they are planted in exactly the same positions as the original ones
The
would have been.
original, right.
Because that's how detailed the information in the archives was.
Incredible. So all these bear different fruit. Is
Yes, they're rows. I mean, this is
Okay.
a row of Morello cherries.
Yes.
And then there's a row of pears, apples, plums, and then you start again with cherries.
How brilliant.
And these are a mixture of those three fruits.
Okay.
4 fruits.
Okay. How wonderful.
And then this is the North Terrace. This bit of the garden actually was designed like this by the Victorians.
Okay.
The 6th Duchess, when she was a widow, and her companion, who was a cousin, they were very influential in this bit.
Right.
And they moved that north wall back about 3 metres because the old road, the old driveway from the road to Inverness used to be back there, and it had changed and gone down to the modern village,
Okay.
leaving that as an unimportant roadway.
Okay.
So they moved the wall literally about 3 metres back.
So then you moved it.
Creating this flat terrace.
I
like
see,
this,
I
you
see, okay.
And creating the herbaceous borders, which I think were much more Victorian and then Edwardian tradition than they would have been earlier Georgian 18th century tradition. And actually we've designed it to be at its best in July, August, because that's when we get most visitors.
Yes.
And for a Scottish herbaceous garden, that actually is a good time. It's that much later than England.
So this is something you've really had a hand in making
Yes.
sure that this carries on for future generations. It's beautiful, and just the scent as well.
Yes, I mean, I hope so, but gardens evolve all the time. You know,
Yes.
there's no way you can say that's how it's going to be forever.
Right. Yes.
Of course it's not.
Yeah. No, but it's also hello. It's also, in my view at least, you know, houses evolve as well, of course, but I think gardens much more than a house. And a garden is something that you can visit really 4 times a year in the seasons, because they change in the seasons.
Yes.
And a house, you know, maybe once a year, seeing what the next project is. But that's what's so wonderful about the gardens, because you can see how in each season how it changes.
No, it is very seasonal, this garden. Because, I mean, in May, the fruit blossom is lovely, and you get these very geometric lines of blossom. And then the herbaceous comes on,
Yes.
led by the roses, and it's quite a good garden for roses. And then there's the high summer is the most colourful period with all the herbaceous.
Yes.
But then the autumn is beautiful here. We have and the trees, you know, round the outside, they have wonderful colour as well as what's in the garden. So I love the autumn actually.
Well, I'm very pleased I came, you know, at the height of the herbaceous borders, looking so absolutely stunning in their colour.
And scent. Can you
Yeah,
smell
oh.
the lilies? Because scent has been a great tradition in this garden. It all mentioned in the archives. It's always saying scented honeysuckle, scented roses, scented everything. So when we were planting, we always had in mind that we wanted to have good wafts of scent.
Yeah. Well, I've had plenty from the point that we started. I mean, it's just constant. I feel like it's absolutely constant. And this is a spectacular view here as well.
Well, there's Hercules.
Hercules, there he is.
There is very odd geometry in this garden. Nothing is actually 90 degrees. It's so nice now, the garden is, I mean, a garden's never done, but it's kind of complete. And right now we just redo things or rejig things a little bit, add a bit of more colour. When something's not looking quite right, change it.
It's just lovely.
Thank you so much for joining me, and I hope you've enjoyed this horticultural feast as much as I have. I look forward to seeing you soon for more historic house adventures.